think what's really interesting here is the timeline, and the Prime Minister really does shed a very clear light on sort of the process in the days before. First of all, he said that the Emergencies Act was in the back of their mind from the very beginning of this protest. He talks about the fact that at the very beginning of the pandemic, there had been questions about whether the federal government was going to invoke the Emergencies Act to potentially put new rules in place around public health measures. So he says at the very beginning of the pandemic, they had discussions around the cabinet table. They were briefed about the Emergencies Act, what the threshold looks like. So that's why he says the act itself was sort of at the top of their minds, which I think is how he phrased it at the very beginning of this protest. Then he goes into the fact that around February 10th, so about 4 days before the act was actually invoked, that's when they started looking at what extra tools could the act potentially put in place. He said the act itself wouldn't have made a significant difference if there weren't tools and specific measures and changes that could be put in place. So about 4 days before the act was put in place, the government started coming up with tools that could be used. For example, he highlighted the need to compel tow trucks. That was one that was brought forward. Another one was around the ability of banks to freeze the assets and the accounts of individuals who were contributing and taking part in the convoy. So he said there was a couple days of discussions about what specific tools could be put in place. He also talked about the fact that, there were a lot of plans that were brought up, but he said they never really saw any specific plans before the invocation of the act from police that provided details about how officers were going to be used to end this. So he said, that the police didn't really have the situation under control. And he said there wasn't a clear plan from any policing level about how this would be finished. He said, had there been a clear plan with exact movements, that may have been a different situation. And then we get into February 13th. So this is the day before the act was invoked. He says that's when they started to have some more meetings. They went into details about it. They again looked at the act. They looked at the police reports and said there wasn't really a clear plan. So he had this meeting with the incident response group. He says there was consensus around that table that the act was the right path forward. So then on the morning of February 14th, when the act was actually invoked, it started with a call to caucus. Caucus members were told that the government was considering very strongly invoking the act. He says, again, there was consensus there. From there, they went to the First Minister's meeting. He said, had he heard something different from the premiers in terms of clear, concrete plans about what they could do to help, offering additional assistance, he says, again, he still could have been convinced that the act was not the way to go. He said at that meeting there was some disagreement. He did point out Kenny, who said he wasn't going to quail about the use of the act, but said that he didn't need it in Alberta. But the Prime Minister said none of the premiers actually provided any clear assistance or plans or offers in terms of what tools they had to end this protest and to ensure that the protests didn't continue moving forward. So from there, he said the decision still had not been 100% made in his mind. He said really that ultimately came down at 3:41 on February 14th. That's when the clerk of the Privy Council, the top public servant, came forward with a recommendation that the public service, based on all of the advice it had received, believed that the federal government should invoke the act. And you heard the Prime Minister just at the end there, Marcia, saying that he did even weigh the idea of not invoking the act. He says that he believed that had something else happened, had this continued, had there been a death, that would have weighed heavily on him. And so he said, based on the advice from the Privy Council and all the other advice he had, it was around just after that call at 3:41 with the Privy Council that he decided to invoke the act.
Okay, so they're on a break now. They're taking 15 minutes. And then what will happen after the break, Annie?
So after that, there's going to be 2 hours of cross-examination. So from a wide variety of lawyers, there'll be a lot of civil liberties associations, for example, and the head of the Freedom Convoy, their lawyer, will also be talking. You can bet that a lot of this will talk about, were these protesters violent? Did you see them connected to, other groups that really presented a security threat? All along, sort of the Civil Liberties Association has said that, there is the right to protest in Canada. There's freedom of expression, that this took away some of that. The Freedom Convoy also says the same thing, and the lawyer has said, look, there was no real violence, that, this was a protest and that these individuals had a right to be there and they had the ability to be protesting what they believed to be a law and a rule that was not just. So that, I think, will be a lot of the focus today. You're also then going to be hearing from the lawyer who's representing sort of the City of Ottawa residents. So a lot of cross-examination over the next 2 hours. It's going to have to be pretty poignant and quick. Normally the cross-examination has lasted quite a bit longer. So it'll be interesting to see, what specific questions the Prime Minister gets asked and how much he answers.
All right, Annie, thanks for all that. Annie Bergeron-Oliver.